Well, and my hope when I suggested that we start talking about contracts is that this would be of benefit to not only managers but elected officials to be able to use this kind of as a checklist, I guess, of elements that should be considered in any kind of an agreement.
You are listening to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. Twice each month, Gregg and Jae draw on their combined 80-plus years of state and local government work experience to help listeners avoid the pitfalls they and others have unwittingly stumbled into. And now, on to the episode.
Good morning. This is Jae Goodshow. We're bringing to you Manager Brothers Lessons Learned. This is episode 8. We're going to be talking about manager contracts. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Greg Goodshow, and Jay and I are both suffering from colds. So you may, if you're a regular listener, and we might not sound exactly the way that we ordinarily sound. We're both a little bit stuffy here, but in our dedication to bringing you another episode of Lessons Learned, we are gonna work through this just like we're healthy.
Well, and hopefully we won't inflict our electronics with our cold, which we have a little bit of a hiccup this morning already. So
maybe that's why they call them viruses.
I suppose I didn't know it was transmittable to electronics, but
apparently
who knows?
so. Apparently,
maybe it's maybe it's the human element getting even with AI.
We'll just see what we can do here. So
Yes.
What Jay's referring to is we lost connection. So this is our second take on doing this. We like to do this in one take. So that it has that vitality to it, which means that we never cover up any of our mistakes. You just get to hear them.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, it's not true.
Yeah, vitality is a good word. I was thinking continuity, but vitality might be better. But we'll go with that.
Anybody that's listened to it has figured out that we have hardly any continuity.
That's probably true. That's probably true. I think we gave that in our first episode disclaimer, something to that effect.
Right.
So.
We probably shouldn't need to repeat it each and every time. I will say that we edit out. I do the editing, and I edit out the stuff that makes us sound like we're complete idiots. So you can imagine if you're listening to this and we sound halfway intelligent. Imagine the stuff that we have left out that would have made us sound only a quarter of the way intelligent or something.
and those that know us probably know better.
That's exactly right.
So,
which again, why would anyone listen to us?
It's true.
I think it's really if we can make this work, anybody can make this work. I think that's the message.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and as we initially thought, we would talk about things on lessons learned, what not to do. So if people want to look at us as a reflection of what not to do, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
so.
that is exactly right. A lot of the reasons that we look even as competent as we do is because we have just made a lot of mistakes and learned from them in the past. So that's what we're trying to pass on.
We're trying to learn from those mistakes. So that's yes.
All right. Well, let's start talking about. And I know you want to cover some preliminary issues even before we get to thinking about what that first contract might look like.
Yes, I think it's necessary. We're talking, probably 4 episodes, or if not 5, to get through some of these issues. So this first one, we're going to be looking at some of the preliminary things that aren't really necessarily contract elements, but are other elements that managers need to consider, and elected officials certainly need to consider if they want to attract candidates and retain, a qualified manager. And one of those is, looking at what is the council's, configuration. I had an assignment that had a 5-member city council, and the others have been 7-member councils. And certainly reflecting back on a 5-member, it only takes 3 members of council to be able to make decisions of all kinds, let alone whether to hire a manager or even to have a manager. And it's something that I think that does require some consideration here.
Sure, absolutely. And one of the challenges with a small board, and really it's true of any board, is you can end up with the potential for a close split, and maybe more likely in a 5-member council than in a 7-member council. And I have mentioned, I think before here, that early in my tenure, my first manager job, I was hired on a 4-3 vote. Now, I attributed that to the fact that I was also that community's first manager. Unwisely thought that I could, didn't have to worry about that. They'd see how wonderful I was, and the naysayers would, come on board. Well, that didn't happen. And in fact, I made the second mistake of taking a job with a 4-3 vote right before an election. And so, new council members came on, and it was still a 4-3 vote. And that's as good as it got for the entire 2 years that I was there. And so that's a consideration, as well as not only the size of the council and the potential for even a single member to be, particularly disruptive, but how solid is the support for hiring that candidate at the time that they come on board. And I have known managers that have run into this kind of a situation where they're hired with slim majorities, and in some cases that majority disappears after the next election, and then you don't have a job anymore.
Well, and I think that's something that I certainly didn't even think to ask the question, but most times, if not every time, the vote was taken when I wasn't present in the room. There were other candidates that were interviewed afterwards or something like that. So, managers maybe need to ask the question, what was the vote to hire me, before I make this decision? Yeah,
they certainly should ask that. And I think that's a legitimate question to ask. If you're in a situation where a search consultant is managing that process, it is a legitimate question to say, what was the vote? And even if the vote is unanimous, to say, how strong is that unanimity? Did they just come along here to say that, they had 100%, or because that's something I certainly encourage when I've worked as an interim manager, as councils struggle between two top candidates, is you want to be able to convey, whether it's the search consultant or the interim manager, convey a realistic sense to the candidate. What am I facing here? How strong a fit is that? And it's a little hard to judge. But I have had that conversation with managers that are coming in a situation where I've served as an interim manager, and I think it's something that managers definitely want to ask that question. Don't be so thankful that somebody has decided to hire you that you're willing to overlook any potential warning signs that are out there.
Well, and I think that it's safe to ask those kinds of questions because, even if it is a unanimous vote to hire you, I don't think that there's any harm in asking those questions. I mean, even if it is a split vote and they have to, provide some rationale or some assurances or something like that, I think it's all well worth asking the question.
Yeah, one of the things that you're looking for in that situation is, am I a good fit here? Is this a good fit between me and the council? Think of it kind of like a marriage. Are we compatible? And a part of that is to go in with eyes wide open and say, are there some potential warning signs out there that I ought to be aware of? But is this going to be a good fit with this organization? Am I a good fit with the staff members that I'm inheriting here? Is this a good fit with me in this community? All of those things, I think, are things that you want to be realistically answering for yourself before you decide that, okay, I'm willing to take this to the next step, which is to sit down and negotiate that first contract.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to jump in here for just a minute. Probably the next episode we'll be talking. We're going to jump to with the end in mind. Looking at a termination or a separation.
Right.
Some of these things factor into what are the terms that you want to have in an agreement for your separation. So I'm mentioning that now because we're going to try. We'll visit that at the next episode.
Right.
So
right.
Kind of a corollary to this, asking this question about, what the vote was, I think is a safe question to look at a charter or ordinances or any other documents a municipality might have that provide for not just hiring a manager, but what it takes to replace that manager. Are there written documents that protect that? And is it just a simple majority or is it a super majority? And that can make all of the difference in the world too, as far as the comfort level for the incoming manager.
Absolutely, and I think that there are lots of variations, whether it's in local charter. Some cases you have to factor in state statute. There might be ordinances. All of those things are useful to kind of characterize the community. One of the things that will crop up that a manager might not think to look for is who actually does the appointment. We think of this as there's a vote of the council. But in some instances, the real decision is being made by the actual appointment is made by the mayor.
Right.
So there are some communities that have kind of a strong mayor characteristic to them, even if it's not truly a strong mayor form. But those are things that you want to be aware of. That if it's really comes down to the fact that it's a decision of one person and not necessarily a decision of the entirety of the council, that's a whole other perspective that is useful to keep in mind to make sure that you're comfortable in working in that kind of position and that there's not right from the very beginning some potential that's out there where if you say the wrong thing to the mayor, that you've undermined your credibility with the key individual that ultimately makes the determination as to whether your contract gets renewed or not.
Well, I think the other way to look at this too is, if it is one of those situations with a strong mayor making the appointment and the mayor has, because it's political, obviously, has a falling out with a majority of the rest of the council, right, then all of a sudden, the mayor might find themselves on the hot seat, but then you as the manager might find yourself on the same hot seat only because they might view you as being a pawn of the mayor, I guess, for lack
Correct.
of a better term. Yeah.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So those are some serious things to consider for sure.
Right. And I think what that really means is do your homework. Make
Exactly.
sure that nowadays typically charters are going to be online, the ordinances are online. That's not true everywhere, even today. And so it doesn't hurt to ask and make sure that you've gotten copies of the entirety of the charter. The entirety of the administration section of the ordinances. Those kinds of things are going to be very valuable as you're starting down this path of thinking about, do I want to take this job, and what are going to be the contents of the contract once I've decided that I want to do that.
Yeah. So the element that we're talking about, with a charter or an ordinance, it might be like with a 5-member council might say it takes a vote of 4 members to change managers, or if it's a 7-member council, it takes five members to vote to change that. So that's what we're talking about, and this is just in general. You brought up a point already, with being appointed just before an election. Mm-hmm. There's provisions in there for a moratorium on decisions to replace a manager for a period of say 6 months following an election, and that's a different. I think it's a different element that we need to look at as well.
Right, and oftentimes that's language that might require a supermajority within 90 days or 120 days or 180 days following an election or whatever it might be. If that language is not there in the charter, then it's language that a manager might wish to think about at the time that they're entering into a contract. And I think that gets us, again, into the next episode. We're going to look at contract termination. But I think that that's something that, again, what is the protection that a manager has, following that next election.
Right, and I think a lot of listeners are thinking, well, managers are at-will employees. So what does that really mean? Mm-hmm. And so what we're talking about are, other assurances to provide some level of comfort to an incoming manager on what the conditions are for them not just being hired, but also for what conditions might exist for them being dismissed.
Right, and the other side of that is that it's not only a protection for the manager, it's a protection for the community as well.
Right.
So that if I haven't mentioned it here before, I am surprised, because I oftentimes will bring up the idea that a part of what we try to achieve in local government is stability. The structure, the council manager form, but the entirety of the democratic process is intended to provide a level of stability in the operations of government. And so when you think about having a provision that limits the ability of a new council to change horses in the middle of the stream, that is a part of guaranteeing stability. So yes, it is a protection for the manager and gives a little bit of a sense that, they don't have to worry that 5 days after the election, they're suddenly out looking for a new job. Beyond that, it also assures the community that there is an opportunity for the new council to get seated, learn their roles, learn how the system works before they go off half-cocked on some issue and decide that they have to clean house and all the rest of it. And I think every election carries with it the potential for disruption, but building in systems that provide protection on both sides, and that's what you're really talking about here, I think is useful for a community as it's going through the transitions of managers and elections and those kinds of things.
Well, I think that stability, you can't underemphasize the necessity for stability, because it's not just the impact that it has on the council and the manager. It's the impact, as you said, on the community, but also the ability of the community to be able to recruit, hire, and retain other employees. I don't think there's any communities out there that have just one hired person that runs the whole show. You have Department of Public Works and a host of other departments. You need to be able to, and again, there's a shortage of candidates in a lot of communities right now for especially experienced candidates in other positions within the municipality. So if there's a sense that there's disruption going on at the manager level, not because of the manager necessarily, but just because they haven't been able to retain managers, or there's conflict that exists, it's certainly going to impact on the ability to hire other whether they're appointed or regular employees in that municipality.
We'll return to Manager Brothers Lessons Learned in a moment. Do you have a topic you would like Gregg and Jae to explore? Are you interested in being a guest on Lessons Learned? Do you have comments about this episode? You can write Gregg and Jae using the contact form at greggllc.com/lessons. That's greggllc.com/lessons.
I think this is a good point Jay, to shift gears here a little bit and start then talking about that first contract.
Even preliminary to this is do all managers have contracts, or do all managers want contracts or need contracts? I guess that's the whole thing. And I'm probably as guilty of this as anyone, especially going into the first assignment, you're rather naive. As you say, I think you said earlier, you hope that the community or the council is going to see what benefit there is to having hired you, and things will go along smoothly. So that's
and the thing to point out about that, Jay, is that up until my last appointment, the last community that I served on a full-time basis, all the rest of them that I worked in, I started before manager contracts were legal in Michigan.
Yeah.
And so I would have a letter of appointment that was a few paragraphs, and that's as much as you had. You did not have the protections that are now afforded to managers by having contracts that can incorporate things like severance pay and those kinds of things. I was terminated from a community where I had no contract. They'd come along in the meantime, but I'd never, I had a good relationship with the council, and things had gone along very smoothly for me. I'd been there a long time, 17 years. Well, all of a sudden, I'm not employed anymore, and I didn't have a contract. Now, they treated me very well. We'll talk a little bit about separation agreements the next time we get together and talk. But going into the job after that, well, that was my first chance to have a contract, and I did have a contract. Now, I think it's far more commonplace. But again, we're relating to a Michigan experience. I don't know what the situation is in other states. My impression is that it's commonplace across the United States, but it might not be. And this gets into another related issue, which is that there may be limitations within local charters and ordinances as to the duration of any contract that they can enter into. In some cases, there are provisions that say that you can't have a contract for more than, say, 5 years or something along those lines. And so that's important information to have when you're beginning to look at a contract, as to once you cross the threshold of discovering, oh yes, I am able to have a contract, what are the legal limitations, if any, that pertain to what the provisions of that contract should say. And this, I think, is a good point, Jay, to emphasize that neither you nor I is an attorney, and so anything we're saying here should not be interpreted as legal advice. We're giving manager-type advice here based on our own experiences, but we certainly would recommend that an individual seek out the services of a personal attorney who has experience with labor law, preferably, to look at whatever contract proposals are out there. And most municipalities are going to expect that while they have their city attorney that will look at it, that the candidate will have a representative, a legal representative as well, that's going to sit down and take a look at the terms and conditions and the provisions of the contract and so forth. Now, not all managers do. They take it on their own to do that, and I will confess that I did not. With the one contract that I did have, I felt comfortable enough, being that long in my career, that I knew what the provisions are, and I felt I was being treated well by the city attorney with those provisions. So I didn't feel a need for it, but that's something that I think that managers are well served, and I have recommended other managers that they consider, paying a couple of bucks to have legal counsel take a look at the contract before they decide to enter into it. And oftentimes it's useful if you're in a negotiating session with a city council or with the mayor, whoever it is that's the mayor and the city attorney, that you have a representative at the table who is able at that time to say, this is not acceptable, here's some alternative language, and to be the person that can kind of be the bad guy or woman in those negotiations, so that it's not the manager that is taking the blame for having negotiated a tough contract as it relates to language that might pertain to termination clauses or something like that. Put the burden on the attorney to be the, to take the responsibility and the ire of the mayor rather than the manager, him or herself. To this point, we really have been kind of setting the ground setting the stage for having a contract. And I think that our recommendation, and again, it's not legal advice, but our recommendation is that you really want to have one. I think that the days of relying on just a letter of agreement or nothing at all and say, I'm just going to fall under the provisions of the personnel policy of the municipality, those days are gone for managers. And I think that any municipality that thinks that they're going to be able to hire a manager without also going through a contract negotiation process is probably a place you don't want to work. And so I think from this point forward, we're going to assume that that the manager's decided that he or she is going to enter into a contract with the municipality, and the municipality has decided that they are going to play their part in those negotiations as well. As we indicated a little earlier, the next step then for us in terms of conversation is to jump all the way to the end and look at the termination of the contract. What are the circumstances under which that happens? So the next episode is we'll deal with some of those end of contract terms, because I think those are maybe among the most important provisions that managers need to have in mind, and it's one of the places where you can run into the greatest number of pitfalls if you're not really thinking ahead to what does this look like when we wrap this up. And I think we can set the stage for positive conversations about how a contract comes to an end if it needs to.
Yeah, well, and my hope when I suggested that we start talking about contracts is that this would be of benefit to not only managers but elected officials to be able to use this kind of as a checklist, I guess, of elements that should be considered in any kind of an agreement.
All right, well, Jay, today we have a sponsor for this episode, and it is a brand new sponsor for us, Wise Acre Solutions. And they are the makers of the It's All Greek to Me language learning app. Jay, I know you took Spanish in high school, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I took French. What's that?
I said C. That's about all I remember.
So. Well, that's handy, and I think most people have at least a familiarity with a couple of languages and common expressions like that. But this is the It's All Greek to Me language learning app. There are other well-known language programs on the market, but they were produced for tourists, diplomats, and exchange students. It's All Greek to Me was designed specifically for Americans who don't want to look stupid when they encounter foreign loan words and expressions. Now, picture this. You're visiting Greek town, you begin to feel a little bit hungry, you stop into a bakery, and you see in the case there a tasty confection. Suddenly, you realize you can't remember if it's baklava, balaclava, or balalaika, and you're forced to stand there pointing at the display case like a 5-year-old. How embarrassing! And I hope that's never happened to you, Jay.
Only in restaurants. I point at the pictures of the food that I really like the looks of.
Well, then you are a perfect candidate for one of these programs. Here's another circumstance. Maybe your local book club has decided to work its way through Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. You're comfortable with the names Achilles and Hector, but what about Odysseus, Telemachus, or Agamemnon, or one of the other 100 names that appear in those books? You just sit there praying that no one asks you to read a passage because you're not convinced you can pronounce them correctly. This is where It's All Greek to Me can be invaluable. This app simply assists you in gaining familiarity with common words and phrases you're most likely to encounter as you go through your daily life, visiting restaurants, reading books, having general conversations. And here's the best part. Greek is not the only option available from Wiseacre Solutions. For aspiring attorneys, All Roads Lead to Rome covers common Latin phrases used in legal documents. All the Romance languages are available too, so you can avoid the faux pas of mispronouncing foie gras. How about Indian for the next time you have a craving for something more than curry? Each language app is available for lifetime use for the low price of $10. However, as an introductory offer, It's All Greek to Me can be purchased for just $5. So, stop looking foolish in public. Instead, turn to Wiseacre Solutions for problems you didn't know you had.
All right.
Well, enough of that. I think that, we did this at the beginning of the episode that the recording that we had to that didn't work out. So, Happy New Year, Jay.
Same as well to you. I don't know if we ever did wish people a Merry Christmas, but that's behind us at this point, and the year just 2023 has just zipped by, and I as I said before, I blame this on my children because it seems like time has gone twice as fast after having had children.
No question about it. No question about it. Well, it'll be, time is going to go by fast again, another 2 weeks, and we will be back with another episode dealing with manager contracts and looking at the termination of contracts. So tune in again for us then.
Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed the show. Manager Brothers Lessons Learned is a production of Gregg Guidance, LLC, a multi-specialty consulting firm offering interim management, group process facilitation, workflow analysis, operational studies, and more to local governments in Michigan and beyond.